So everyone has heard a member of the older generation. At some point, you've heard it. They just don't make them like they used to when referring to cars and the way they're made. And we've probably all seen our own fair share of old cars driving down the road, making you think that maybe they're right. Maybe they don't make them like they used to. So today I decided to do some research and a deep dive into this topic, kind of taking a look at automotive manufacturing, how it's changed over the years, and finding out if it's really true. Are old cars actually more reliable than the new counterparts that we get? And are manufacturers implementing planned obsolescence into their designs in order to shorten the lifespan of vehicles and ultimately have customers more frequently? So before we really dive into the topic, I want to share my experience with old cars, planned obsolescence, and just kind of what I've seen with old cars versus new cars. So just last week, part of the reason why I'm even making this video and why I got interested in this topic, my dad's car from 2012, it's a Lexus LS 460, started having transmission problems where it wouldn't go past third gear, and on his way home he basically had to drive on the highway like 40 miles an hour in the right lane because the car just wouldn't shift gears. The car has around 140 or 150,000 miles, so higher mileage but not like obnoxiously high, especially for a Toyota. And just objectively, yeah, you could say the car is 12, 13 years old, but compared to a lot of other stuff you see, it's really not that old. And we all know Toyota as the company known for building reliable, long-term, bulletproof cars, right? And now I'd like to compare that with my old car, which was a 2005 Lexus LS 430. The LS 430 was the generation of the Lexus LS, which came before the 460 that my dad drove, and my car used to have over 250 or 60,000 miles before I retired it, and when I did retire it, still ran like a champ. It had no issues. Yeah, the transmission was a little bit slower. You could tell that some things were aging, but really the car drove fine. Mechanically, everything worked perfectly. The oil, every time I would change it, it never came out black. These cars were over-engineered and overbuilt. The only issues I really had with the car was small electronic little, problems with maybe one of the mirrors didn't work or one of the lights didn't work. Nothing that was really complicated. Mechanically though, the car started right up every time. It was a great car, one of my favorite cars that I ever owned. And currently, I drive a 1999 BMW 323IS E36, which has 211,000 miles. And like any old car, it's got its issues. It leaks some oil, this little problem, that little problem, but as you fix things as they come, it's really no big deal. The car drives, I can drive it every day if I wanted to, until it needs a little service again, at which point you can do that and then keep driving. So compare those experiences with older cars built from the 1900s and the early 2000s with modern cars today, where it feels like everywhere you look, manufacturers are just failing to build quality products that last more than just a few years. The amount of people I know who've bought new cars within the last 10 years and they barely lasted 5 years before having some major issue is pretty high. I'm not old enough to really know what it was like back in the 90s to give you a perspective of what the cars were like back then and how long they might have lasted. These problems, it's not like cars never had problems in the first place, but I just feel like today you're seeing it more and more, and it's super common to see in the news all these problems with a lot of modern cars. Toyota, for example, the brand once known to build the most robust and reliable vehicles, is having some of the biggest manufacturing problems out of any automaker right now. We saw quality control issues with the new GR86, which came out last year. If you remember, there was some head gasket problems, as well as the automatic 8-speed transmission on the 2024 Tacoma, which is already failing. These are like brand new cars, which are having huge mechanical failures. And literally just the other day, on January 23rd, Ford announced a massive recall on 273,000 Ford Broncos and Mavericks. All right, so I've gone over the premise, so let's dive in and actually understand what's planned obsolescence. So I'll tell it to you straight from the Oxford Dictionary. Planned obsolescence is the policy of producing consumer goods that rapidly become obsolete and require replacing, achieved by frequent changes in design, termination of the supply of spare parts, and the use of non-durable materials. So how does this manifest in the automotive industry? By far the biggest way is just the frequent model changes. The automotive industry is one of the most competitive in the world, and in order to keep up and make modern cars, manufacturers are constantly adjusting and making changes to their cars every year. Even if they look the same, there's probably a few changes that happen along the way throughout the model's production. But that's pretty expected, right? New cars are constantly getting new technology, getting updated and improved. So that's not really something that you can pinpoint and say, okay, that's what's causing all these issues. But you also see this in the spare parts and production of spare parts. A few years after the end of a production run of a car, the manufacturer typically stops producing spare parts for the cars, which makes it harder and harder as the years go on to find and source spare parts. You might have to turn to used parts, which obviously will not last as long, and you do see a lot of aftermarket manufacturers stepping in to fill the shoes for the demand on old parts. But by far the biggest effect we see is the design of materials as well as software updates, which I'm going to get into later on in the video. In regards to materials, by the looks of it, it seems like cars are just being built using parts and materials that are designed to wear faster and fail earlier. We see this in a lot of modern cars with the overuse of plastics and just a lot of non-durable materials in pretty critical places like, engine components. And in the past, something like an intake manifold would have been typically made out of metal if you go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s. But basically in the last 20-ish, 30 years, they've started using a lot of plastic components where previously they would have had metal. In a hot engine bay where you have rapid heating and cooling and heating and cooling, that can cause a lot of, damage to more brittle materials, something like a plastic that's not as durable. In material science, the degradation that happens from rapid heating and cooling is called creep, defined as the tendency of a solid material to undergo slow deformation while subject to persistent mechanical stresses. So material science has come a really long way in the last 20 years. When designing cars these days, designers are able to run life cycle tests of parts using super advanced software that they didn't have access to earlier, and using this, they can pretty much very, very accurately predict just how long a certain part might last. So let's say they determine that a ball joint or an axle might last 80 or 90,000 miles. They can accurately pinpoint that, and using that information, that's where the warranty argument comes into play. So when it comes to how a manufacturer might choose to structure their warranty policy, you can begin to understand why this might be problematic and against the consumer's best interests. So let's say a company knows that on average their transmission or a certain suspension component is going to last 80,000 miles or around 5 years. They can pretty much offer coverage for those 80,000 miles on the transmission. And then after that, if your engine or transmission fails at 85,000 miles, it can leave the consumer with a huge bill. Because, objectively, it makes sense. Like, if the manufacturer knows that their part is going to last 80,000 miles, what incentive do they have to cover you up till 90,000, let's say? So to touch on software, obviously modern cars are super tech heavy, right? And it's no secret that electrical systems in general are just significantly more complex than mechanical systems. Having a heads-up display, navigation, 9-way adjustable seats, park assist sensors, blind spot indicators, and like 9 cameras on some of these modern cars are all super awesome features, don't get me wrong, but diagnosing and repairing electrical systems requires significantly more time and specialized skill. This obviously results in more complex, labor-intensive, and time-consuming repairs long term. Nowadays, when it comes to software updates in a lot of modern cars, manufacturers are able to do these updates remotely, whereas in the past, you would have had to go to the dealership, get something plugged into your OBD sensor, and they would update it that way. And because of that, a lot of these software updates are not usable on older cars, so it can make the consumers feel that they need to buy the newer one in order to get the newest tech. Speaking of repairs and, updates, let's talk about the right to repair, which is a huge aspect in all of this, which is a really simple concept. It's pretty much just a push to allow manufacturers to design cars in such a way that make it more simple for consumers to either repair cars on their own or bring it to an independent shop, giving access to repair manuals, diagnostic software, and spare parts. When it comes to a lot of modern cars, manufacturers make it purposefully extremely difficult for independent repair shops and consumers to fix their own cars. On newer cars, some of them don't even have dipsticks. A lot of them require really advanced software to even get access to the computer to do basic repairs, remove check engine lights, stuff like that, which independent repair shops have to pay lots of money and use specialized tools to, fix these cars. And it's really not easy. They kind of purposefully gatekeep a lot of information and build cars in such a way using specialty tools that make them difficult to work on. And obviously, the more complex something is to repair, the more specialized knowledge and skills you need, which just drives up the cost. Even if an independent repair shop is doing the repair, where previously, pretty much any independent repair shop would have been able to fix any car, nowadays there's a lot of specialty shops for like Volkswagens or BMWs, because every manufacturer kind of makes it in their own way in order to make it harder and harder to repair these cars when they break, because ultimately they just want the consumer to buy a new car and not fix the old one. And that leaves the consumer pretty much one option, and that's either to get a new car or get it repaired at the dealership. And getting things repaired at the dealership, I'm sure is like 2 to 3 times more expensive than going to an independent repair shop, and that's by design. Right now, a lot of modern cars, and especially EVs, are designed with proprietary systems. For example, if you drive a Tesla, diagnostic software and service to update the car and its electronic systems are only available at the dealerships. There are no such thing as independent Tesla repair shops, and that's for a reason. If something goes wrong with your Tesla, you have to take it to the dealer. There's basically no other option. And speaking of Tesla, let's talk about EVs. The shift towards EVs is bringing up a lot of questions when it comes to the concept of planned obsolescence. The biggest maintenance cost when it comes to EVs long term is the batteries. That's no secret. Everyone knows that. But some of these batteries really start to lose their charge after around the 8-year mark up until the 15-year mark. And when that point comes and you need to replace the battery in your Tesla, you're looking at spending anywhere between minimum like $6,000 up to 15, depending on the exact model. And of course, because no one can do independent Tesla repairs, this needs to be done at the dealership. You can understand why it's kind of a problem and where the clashing of interest between the consumer and the manufacturer begin to come into play. And with governments pushing for more EVs, this pushes consumers to buy the newest EV, constantly get it updated, get the newest one when the old one stops working. This obviously contributes to the pollution and entire concept of planned obsolescence. So if we're really trying to save the planet, it doesn't really seem like making these cars, which pretty much are useless after 8 years and need to be thrown away and replaced with new ones or new batteries, is the right move. So how does this ultimately all affect the consumer? We've talked a bit about the different aspects of this problem, but what are the end consumers feeling? Ultimately, it's really just about cost. You're gonna find all these articles online when you search this topic talking about environmentalism and all this stuff. And while that's great, for most people, it comes down to cost and how it affects them in terms of how much they have to pay for service and new cars and parts, constantly updating models, making changes, updating software, and more complex electrical systems means that for the end user, the cost of operation of vehicles just goes higher and higher every year. And so do the prices for the new cars. These complex systems require more time for design and ultimately more labor costs when it comes to assembly for the manufacturer. So is it all by design, or manufacturers just these greedy entities that want to push you to constantly buy new cars every 4 years and get the old ones off the road and replace them with new ones? I mean, there's an argument for that, but like we've discussed, it's not really a one-sided coin. There's multiple angles to this. Ultimately, manufacturers need to run a profitable organization, and they respond to consumer demands and shifts in the market along with government regulations. And when it comes to consumer demands, like, let's be honest, in first world countries especially, we love our comforts and conveniences. I know people who by choice buy new cars every 4 or 5 years. When you buy a new car, it's pretty normal to expect improvements over the previous generation, especially if you're buying the same model. So I can absolutely understand where manufacturers need to balance their profitability with also providing something better every time that the customer comes through the door. So is this a race to nowhere? I guess time is going to tell. In the past few years, we've seen vehicle prices absolutely skyrocket. Despite these higher costs, the market really doesn't seem to significantly be slowing down in any capacity. So I guess ultimately time will tell how this plays out. Like, are consumers going to decide to keep buying new cars, or are they going to start maintaining their old ones, and our manufacturers going to start building more robust vehicles? It's kind of a market decides type of thing. Thank you for watching the video. My name's Nick. I hope you liked it. I hope you took something away from it. If you're interested in seeing more content like that, consider subscribing. Bye-bye.